Hello, everybody. Here is Michael from New Left. And today we will not be speaking about economics or unionization. We will go into more kind of psychedelic, maybe, or eternal discussion. And it will be about some movement or some ideas and some philosophy that actually I like. And I'm happy that I found someone who can explain it in depth. Bernie, can you please introduce yourself, who you are, what you do?
I'm Bernie Zalea, and I'm currently living in Santa Cruz, California. I'm a Californian by upbringing, but a Connecticut Yankee by birth. But my folks moved to the LA area when I was about 6 weeks old. So certainly California has been, my area of formation. I was born into a fundamentalist Christian religion called Seventh-day Adventism. I don't know if you or any of your viewers have ever heard of it, but it is an American-born fundamentalist religion. Has the second largest parochial school system in the world, second only to the Catholics. A lot of people are surprised to hear that. So I was educated through this Christian fundamentalist parochial school system. But then I managed, even before I finished that schooling, I kind of had a pantheist epiphany when I was in eighth and ninth grade. And it was when I started backpacking as a hobby. So backpacking up into the mountains of Southern California is where I really fell in love with nature in a big way. And a friend of mine told me that now that I was a Nick quotes nature guy, I needed to read Henry David Thoreau's book, Walden. Have you ever heard of that book?
Yeah, I
So
didn't. I personally, I didn't read it, but I know that book. Yeah. I read some passages out of it. So,
Yeah, there are a number of noteworthy, famous passages from it, and so I spent my ninth grade year in high school slowly working through that book, a paragraph by paragraph, because by contemporary standards, it's not a fast read, and I really wanted to absorb it. And I fell in love with the whole philosophy that he articulates in that book. And I learned early on when I started researching him and his life history, I knew that he was kind of regarded as a scandalous person because he had these pantheist ideas. And so I very much, when I was a ninth grader, 14-year-old, thought, well, if pantheism was good enough for Thoreau, it's good enough for me. And so I have considered myself a pantheist ever since.
okay, cool. You started young. For me, it
I
took me,
did.
I don't know, 20, 30 years. I would say 30 years. So, and big chunk of my adulthood was kind of wandering in the wilderness. So good for you.
I did. I continued to just study it from every conceivable angle. Um, for your listeners, so who are some famous pantheists? Probably the most famous pantheist is Albert Einstein. And in the European philosophical tradition, Baruch Spinoza, uh, who was kicked out of his synagogue when he was 24 years old in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, for his pantheistic, non-monotheistic ideas. And he never used the word pantheism, but scholars now look at his philosophy and see that he was indeed
Sorry to jump in. He
articulated.
didn't use it because
Yeah.
he didn't know it, or he didn't use it because he
Uh,
wanted to
the,
somehow kind of hide his true colors, or
no, the word hadn't been coined yet.
okay.
So he was writing in the mid 1600s, and the word pantheism in Latin wasn't coined until 1697.
Okay,
And
okay.
then the first person to use the word pantheist in English was a guy named John Toland. He was an Englishman and he coined the word. He himself wasn't a pantheist, but he coined the word to describe other people that he was talking about. So he used the word for the first time in 1705. So as a word describing, the pantheist philosophy and religion, really, uh, it's that word has been around since 1705, and that's why Spinoza didn't use it because it hadn't been coined yet. But philosophy scholars look at his ideas uh, and say, well, clearly Spinoza was making a pantheist argument. So he's considered the first major philosopher of pantheism in the European philosophical system.
Hmm. And
So
what
that's a
about
little bit
Heraclit or Laozi from the ancient times? I mean, they kind of touched it. I don't know. I just.
Oh, definitely. Of the, religion scholars, kind of divide the world's big religions into about 10 categories, with Taoism being one of them, and Lao Tse in his book, The Tao Te Ching. And it is, many religion scholars do classify it as a pantheist religion. But, they didn't use that word because the word hadn't been coined yet. But
Mhm.
it definitely has very strong pantheist elements in Taoism. And let's see, what was the other one you
No,
mentioned? Oh,
Heraclit from Greece, everything flows, or how you translate it into English. So he was kind
right.
of dualist as well. So.
Right. Yeah, he definitely can be considered um, a pantheist thinker as well. So yes, it's a very ancient idea, but the word is about 300 years old.
Mhm. And tell us something about the organization. That's let's face it, the main reason why we are having the discussion, because I am part of your organization. Okay, not yours, yeah, but
Right.
kinda, yeah. That's how we came
So
into contact. So give us some
that's
insights there. What's going on there?
the organization is called the Universalist Pantheist Society. And we're now 51 years old. It was founded here in California in the Sierra Nevada mountains in 1975. And our treasurer, Harold Wood, was one of the founding members of the organization 51 years ago. Uh, and basically, it was an attempt to create an organization uh, to bring people of a pantheist orientation to have a space and have an organization. So we do bill ourselves as the oldest pantheist
It
organization
was the
in
first of its kind, so late in the whole kind of evolution of pantheism. So I'm
yeah, in
surprised. Okay.
terms of having a formal organization to embrace and promote pantheist ideas. It is, as far as I know, the first one to
That's kind of
formally
sad,
incorporate.
no?
Was
That's it
that
was
kind of sad?
it was around for thousands of years, these ideas, and
Right,
it was not formalized till 51 years ago, at least socially formalized, as an organization.
right.
Scientology is, I guess older, isn't it? Scientology.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Even
yeah.
though Hubbard
Even
made it up
inside,
in what, 19th century or 20th century, I don't know exactly where he lived. And yeah, that's funny.
yes. Other John Burroughs. If you were to go to Wikipedia and look him up, he's another progenitor of he expressly called himself a pantheist. And he was a nature enthusiast and philosopher in the mid 19th century here in the United States. So, and Thoreau, of course, Thoreau wasn't big on labels, but when was accused of being a pantheist,
He
he
didn't
said, "Well,
object.
if I do the words and deeds of one, well, then I was born to be a pantheist." That was
Uh-huh.
his response.
Okay.
But the reason why pantheism is so controversial in Western culture is it's considered the great big no-no of Christianity. Going to the Apostle Paul's book of Romans, Romans 1:25, he declares this edict that will get quoted by conservative Christians to this day, is that you must only worship the Creator and not the creation.
Mm-hmm.
And the pantheist says the Creator and the creation are the same thing. And so, yes, we do worship the creation. And so, if you're worried about being accused of being a heretic or even worse, an apostate or an
Mm-hmm.
atheist,
This
then
is a
you're going to
safe
be
path.
you're going to be afraid to call yourself a pantheist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've actually written in some of my scholarship of all the ways that liberal Christians are actually pantheists, but they try to hide it.
Yeah.
And the way they hide it is there's this other word called panentheism. So there's an en put in the middle of the word. And so, pantheist means pan, all, theos, God. So all is God. That's what pantheism, that's where the word comes from. Is all is God. And if you look it up in the dictionary, that's what it'll say. Whereas panentheism, that en means in English. So all is in God. And so if you're a liberal Christian, being able to say that we're merely in God, but God is more than the cosmos, that gives you a theological out to be embracing pantheistic ideas without being accused of this terrible heresy of being a pantheist,
Mm.
which the Apostle Paul prohibited in Romans 1:25.
So tell us a little bit more about the organization. I mean, it started in Americas. Was it from the day one meant to be an international organization, or it kind of evolved into, no one assumed back then, 50 something years ago, that it will be,
Right.
some fella from Slovakia will be a member as an example? Or was
I,
it
I
meant
think
to be big from the get-go?
the I would say, Harold knows the history of the organization better than I do, and you might want to set up an interview with him sometime. But I think it is always understood that it had could and should be an international organization. Of course, it was um, founded at a time when communication, was done by snail mail. You wrote a letter and you mailed it out. And so the ability of the organization to make itself known, in pre-internet times, was more of a challenge. So basically, it passed by word of mouth of people that uh, um, would hear about pantheism and then join the organization. And the organization, one of its real legacy contributions is that it publishes this quarterly magazine called Pantheist Vision. And so Pantheist Vision has been in continual publication since the late 1970s. And we now have quite an archive of issues for that address kind of pantheist topics, nature appreciation, environmental concern, etc. And
Mm.
so, in terms of what's the main activity of the organization, really the main activity is producing that quarterly journal and mailing it out to the members that want to receive a hard copy. And we do still have members that are old school and analog and want to receive the publication in hard copy, but you can also receive it via PDF, via your email. I don't know if you've received an issue
No,
yet.
no, no. I just joined a few weeks back,
Right.
so I will get it. But that's not the reason why I joined. For me, the reason why I joined is that I want to promote those ideas because I think that it can save us slash solve a lot of our problems, because this is
Right,
actually question I wanna, or maybe a idea that you can kind of develop, is that the Christian kind of way of thinking is too arrogant for modern human. You know, back in the Middle Ages or before that, it was okay to kind of consider nature something less, important than humans were back then,
right,
because, well, as trouble goes and damage, that back then, 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, people couldn't. I mean, they still could have destroyed the environment, but not at the scale that we are doing now. So that's
right.
the one of the main reasons why I consider myself pantheist, is if you really rethink your position in nature and don't go at it from this arrogant perspective that, we are the pinnacle of creation, and all the other animals we can do whatever you want with them. They don't
Right.
suffer, as René Descartes was saying 400 years ago, though we can kind of, they don't suffer. So you can do whatever you want to those petty things. So when you are kind of redeveloping or rethinking the way how we should function in this universe of ours, then pantheism, at least for my mind, is the natural answer to how to kind of reshape our position in the whole thing we call life or nature or universe or whatever. So what do you have to say to that?
Well, it's interesting to hear what you just said because you are, I don't know if you've ever heard of this very famous essay that was published in the journal Science in 1967 by a professor of history at the University of California, Los Angeles. Back in 1967, he published this article called The Historical Roots of Our Ecologic Crisis. And in that essay, among other things, he said that exactly what you just said, is that a lot of our environmental problems stem from this Christian ideology of seeing humanity as the supreme presence on this planet, and that nature is way beneath us and really subject to our use, but not our concern or appreciation. And so he made the argument you just made, uh, and said we need to totally rethink our conception of humanity's place in the cosmos and on our planet. And so long as we continue to maintain this humanist arrogance, that we're going to continue to destroy and exploit the planet. So, and that the fact that Lynn White, Professor Lynn White, made this accusation back in 1967 has been, fodder for philosophical and theological conversation ever since. A lot of people came forward and said Lynn White is exactly right. It is Christianity's fault. And Christian thinkers said, no, 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 that's a false accusation. Christianity is actually, if properly understood, very pro-environment. And this is a conversation that has raged on ever since 1967. Uh, I address it in my PhD dissertation, which I completed in 2018. I studied the way conservative Christians and liberal Christians address this issue. Uh, and so um, I am curious, how did you first encounter the word pantheism?
I don't know. I have no idea. I just kind of, it crossed my path sometimes, but it kind of snowballed into I mean, it wasn't like a explosion as you were describing it, that something clicked in your mind. And, since
Right,
what you said, 14 years old, you kind of knew that this is me. For
right,
me, it took longer, but then, everyone has their own path. So that's not the thing. The thing is that what the because I want to talk more about your organization. So how big is it? Where do you have your members? Because That's, as I said, that's one of the main reasons why I'm doing this interview, why I joined. I want to promote this idea because it's long overdue that people rethink their position. And not only, it's not only environment. What I'm concerned with is the mankind as such. I think that pantheism can unite. That all these other religions are kind of too Eurocentric or China-centric or Japan-centric or whatever. Yeah. But
Right,
kind of with pantheism, when everything is everything, then there is no center. Yeah.
right. Um, our organization, even though it's old, it remains small. Um, I
Because you don't want to grow or because you want to kind of keep it pure?
we want it to grow, um, but we've entered a period of time when people are more resistant to joining things
Oh,
for whatever
I'm
reason.
a trade unionist. I can sing songs about that. Yeah.
Yes. And so, uh, but we see our main role is maintaining, we have a website on the internet. Our other major kind of pantheism colleague, a man named Paul Harrison, who was a professor of environmental studies in England. He lives in the United States here. And people wanting to know more about the varieties of pantheist thought. He's written a book called The Elements of Pantheism, and it's a pretty good introduction to the
Say
range of
again that name
pantheist
so
stuff.
that people remember it. How is his name?
Paul Harrison.
Okay.
And so he founded something that he calls the World Pantheism Movement. Um, and unlike us, the big difference between us and the Universal Pantheist Society is we're more ecumenical. We are more, and the universal in our title is we're not trying to promote a specifically dogmatic view of pantheism. Pantheism can come in a variety of flavors, and we're open to all of them. Paul Harrison and the World Pantheist movement are more, they want to promote what philosophers would call naturalistic pantheism. So
Which is
that would be non-supernaturalism. So it's taking the cosmos as Einstein would understand it, and as Einstein, I brought up Einstein earlier, and Einstein, as a Jew, was often asked, "Well, do you believe in God?" And his response on one occasion was, "I believe in the God of Spinoza, but I don't believe in a personal God. I don't think there's a man in the sky watching what we're doing and individualistically intervening in reality. I don't believe in that God," Einstein said. So when he said, I believe in the God of Spinoza, that's how we can say, okay, Einstein was a pantheist. So the laws of the universe, energy and matter that create this cosmos. That's all there is if you're thinking about reality as a naturalistic pantheism. Um, the thing that sets uh, naturalistic pantheism in contrast to like a nihilistic atheist. A nihilistic atheist would say there's just matter and energy, and that's all there is. We live our life and then we die, and then there's nothing after it. A nihilistic atheist would say, and there's no meaning. There's no inherent meaning in reality. And that's where the pantheist differs. So it's say, yes, Mr. Nihilistic Atheist, you're right about the fact that all there is matter and energy, but it's fantastic. It's glorious. It's wonderful. And it's worth worshiping. Even though we don't get to have a heaven and an afterlife afterwards out of this point of view, it's an emphasis on this reality is important. It's meaningful. This is the one life we have to live. Let's live it in a meaningful manner. That would be the pantheist response to the atheist who's a pure naturalist as well. And so the naturalistic pantheist, and the nihilistic atheist see reality the same, but they react to it. I often think that pantheism is an affective response to reality. Uh, if you look out on reality and say, oh, this is just meaningless, well, then you're a nihilist and probably an atheist. If you're a pantheist and you look out on the world and say, how wonderful this is. I'm so lucky to be alive and to have this one life to live. We both see the same
I am
reality.
not there yet, Bernie. I'm not lucky to be alive all the time.
I've had my own dark nights of the soul as well, largely related to the way we're treating the planet.
Uh,
Uh,
and each
so,
other. It goes hand
and
in
each
hand.
other, and each other. But so anyway, however, pantheism doesn't have to be naturalistic. I did a master's thesis down at the University of Florida on American pantheism, and I divided pantheism into two types: naturalistic pantheism, which is what I was just describing, and spiritualized pantheism. And so to say you're a pantheist is to say everything that exists is sacred. However, maybe there are unseen spirits. Maybe there is some heaven inside this reality. Maybe there is an afterlife. Maybe there is reincarnation. If you're that kind of pantheist, then as an academic that studies pantheism, I would say you're what I call a spiritualized. You are open to and maybe even affirmatively believe in unseen realities that naturalistic science can't detect. Uh, so
Yet,
yeah,
yeah, yet.
yeah. And so the Universal Pantheist Society is open to both kinds of pantheism, whereas the World Pantheist Movement is only open to the naturalistic, just matter and energy interpretation of reality. So that's our big, the big theological, philosophical, metaphysical divide
Hmm.
between. I count myself amongst the naturalistic pantheists, but I'm not as zealous as Paul Harrison is
Uh-huh.
in trying to say you should be a naturalistic pantheist and close off these other modes of understanding reality.
Mm. Question I have, because so far we are talking primarily about Europeans. Yeah, okay. We mentioned Laozi, but it was
Right,
3,000 years ago almost. What
right.
about pantheism today in the world? Like, is it mainly, okay, not European because you are in States, but like, Christian thing? Or are you having many members from Japan or China or South America or Africa or whatever? Because, when it's pan, then it should be everywhere and not in England and States and Slovakia.
Right. Well, we're certainly open to members from anywhere. And in the world of the internet, that becomes an easier thing to do. People will, I don't know how you specifically found the Universal Pantheist Society. I can imagine you found it online and found out that we exist and that you can become a member. Uh, and so our ability to be present in the world, and attract an international audience, has increased in the age of the internet. So I know we do have international members, but we're still primarily a United States organization.
Hmm. Okay. And now the reasons why isn't, it's not so much about the organization, but the question goes more into the pantheism as such. So is it primarily kind of European civilization thing, or are there other civilizations, let's put it that way, that are open to the idea, like in China or wherever, Indonesia, I don't know,
Right. Well, I think that Buddhism can be thought of um, as a type of pantheism, although I don't actually know any Buddhists that expressly embrace pantheism. But as I analyze, uh, especially the oldest form of Buddhism, has a very could be understood as a type of pantheism. It's still, many people call Theravada Buddhism, which is the oldest branch closest to the historical Buddha, if there was such a person. Their
hmm
historians debate whether or not there even was a Buddha, but most think there probably was some guy, but we don't really know much about him. And how much of the ideas associated with Buddhism actually trace back to this guy, that's a matter of historical debate. But basically, um, Buddhism is often accused of being atheistic because it doesn't, at least the Theravadan Buddhism, this oldest form, doesn't talk about gods, but it does talk about reincarnation. And so that's kind of supernaturalistic. I don't believe in reincarnation because I don't think there's any evidence of it. I don't think science has shown any evidence.
No, it depends how
But
you define reincarnation. I mean, in the end, everything goes in a circle, and at least that's my take. So,
well,
okay,
I
maybe
had a
maybe not in that my mind and whatever, and all the
right,
deeds, and I will be punished and be somehow an ant or whatever.
right.
But yeah.
No, I would agree that our elements will be recycled, and so in that sense,
Not only that, our souls as well. No, it goes through history because all the deeds are kind of rippling or have rippling effects on people we encounter, and
right,
some deeds are good, some not so. So if you make people suffer, then well, the suffering continues because well, that's how the world runs. No, that
right,
suffering kind of snowballs into more suffering, or at least not less suffering usually.
right.
We can just see it on
So
Donald Trump, your great president of today. That something broke in that family.
yes, something very distinctly broke in that man's head. Um, so you've actually just um, identified something called maybe process theology or process naturalism. And so process theology articulates what you just did, which is the idea that reality is a process. And so it's what we do even after our mortal existences pass does ripple on into the future. And so reality isn't static; it's a ongoing process, and we ride along in that stream. So this is kind of like Heraclitus, and reality is a river, uh, and so um, and a process theology. It's a very liberal branch of Christian theology. Says, well, God is in the process, but is in, and it's also called panentheistic because it still imagines that there's a God outside of this process, but watching it with great interest and calling us to be our best selves. And so that's process theology. A process naturalist is very consistent with naturalistic pantheism. It goes with the naturalistic understanding of reality, but says it is a process. And so that everything we do will have an effect, whether we ever know what that effect was or not. And so it's this ongoing process rather than some kind of static reality.
Okay, so let's talk about all the kind of like ideals of pantheism in your mind? What is important to mention, and all the personalities, or maybe not even not, maybe the personalities are not as important as the ideas. At least that's my take, that we are ephemeral creatures, but the ideas, I like what said in V for Vendetta, that ideas are bulletproof. Like ideas live on.
That is, I watched that movie, but I forgot that line.
Yeah, well, one of
Um,
the best ever.
uh,
Yeah, because you
the
can't kill an idea. Actually, the more you try, the more you'll kind of lose, because you make it even more stronger usually.
Well, and one of my intellectual um, godfathers is a European sociologist, a guy named Max Weber.
Hmm.
He was German, and he wrote a book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And in that book, he is if I, as a sociologist, there's a line in that book where he says that he is exploring whether or not ideas can be effective forces in history. And so not only are ideas bulletproof, they're consequential. Uh, People's ideas can indeed form the basis for why they do what they do. And to me, that's the importance of pantheism. I think in responding to Lynn White's critique that Christianity's three-tier universe, where there's God on top and just a little bit under God are humans, and then everything else is down, way down under our feet, naturally leads to patterns of exploitation and destruction. And that if we were to see ourselves as connected and embedded in reality and related to all of reality, including the rest of our life form, fellow life forms on this planet, if we saw them as our family rather than servants and slaves to be exploited, uh, hopefully that would be an idea that would be an effective force in history for the better. Whereas, this Christian human supremacy has been an effective idea for our worsening, our destruction.
Maybe a question that popped into my mind now. What about the Chinese? They are not exactly hugging trees all the time as well. So, and they can't be accused being Christians. Again, some of them can, but their
Right.
religion is not as nature friendly as one would imagine, right, when they are not Christians. So how you explain that?
Well, I think the simple explanation, well, you've identified, a Canadian geographer, professor of geography named Yifu Tuan, uh, wrote right after Lynn White issued his indictment against Christianity. He said what you just said. But what about the Chinese? Even before they'd ever heard of Christianity, they were busy destroying, their natural environment. And so seeing the Chinese manage to accomplish this level of environmental destruction, having never heard of Christianity, well, then it must not be primarily Christianity's fault. So he responded and made the argument that you just did. And I think, however, that we can also say that whatever tendencies, towards environmental destructive behavior that the Chinese already had, maybe it's not a European thing or a Chinese thing or an Indian subcontinent thing, a Hinduism thing. Maybe it's a human thing. Maybe that there is just something about us as humans that naturally predispose us to environmentally destructive behavior, regardless of what philosophical or theological layers we place on top of ourselves. So that's one way to explain why the Chinese, you know, managed to discover environmental exploitation long before they had the first Christian missionary show up.
Mm. So that leads to an important question. What is it for you, the evilness of a, I don't know, primary forces, nature, or whatever you want to put it? Because the examples of environmental destruction and sadism are pretty ubiquitous everywhere on the planet. So, the Aborigines were exactly tree huggers as well. So,
That's right. Yeah, and you actually bring up another controversial issue because a lot of environmentalists like to point to indigenous cultures as our models for how we should be. And there's a Shepherd Kretsch wrote a book called The Ecological Indian, and he basically says that the notion of the environmentally friendly an environmentalist indigenous person is a relatively recently created romantic idea. And that, yes, it's true that Native American peoples and indigenous peoples around the world have caused less environmental harm, but that's primarily because they didn't have the technology that Western Europeans invented and just put that technology in the indigenous person's hands and maybe put a bunch of
in
coal.
Houston, we got a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And, for instance, the largest Indian population in the United States are the Navajos, which are primarily down in Arizona. And up in the northern part of their reservation are a whole bunch of coal deposits. And so the Navajo have been, for the most part, more than eager to strip mine that coal and profit from it.
Mm.
And so, you know, give give the indigenous person the technology and show them where there's a resource they can exploit for money. And they tend to climb on the exploitation bandwagon quite eagerly,
Mm. There is
which
even
is unfortunate.
stronger argument from the history of kind of mankind and our planet. I don't know whether you've read from Jared Diamond,
I
Guns, Germs, and Steel. He was
Yes.
describing as the first settlers, or not even settlers, but first people that came to Americas back 10,000 years ago, wherever it was, how they were
Right,
moving south, how the big animals were disappearing
right,
suddenly as the people were coming through. So, well, as
right.
environmentally friendly behavior goes, to kill everything in your path isn't exactly that. So,
Exactly right. And there's another book. I've read Guns, Germs, and Steel, and I've watched the National Geographic documentary.
uh-huh.
And so, if people, Guns, Germs, and Steel is kind of a thick book, but the 3 1 hour episodes really captures the core ideas of the book, and it stars Jared Diamond. I recommend that to everybody. I
Mhm.
would show it to my students in class. And there's another book, though, that makes the point you just did. I think it's called After the Ice. And so, after the ice is after the last ice age, when the glaciers retreated back north, allowing humanity to spread out of Africa. And when they did spread out of Africa, they killed everything in their path.
Mm.
And so again, and that's no coal, no steam engines, just some thrusting spears, and that's all they needed to wreak havoc across the planet everywhere they went.
So back to the
So
question. So what is your kind of take why we behave this way? What kind of
I
broke in us? Because, okay, point can be made that the other animals aren't exactly angels as well. So they just they create this equilibrium not because they are so peaceful and nice, just
right,
because, well, they don't have the technology. If only, if only, I don't know, gepards or lions could kind of run all the time and kill everything in their path, probably they would. So who knows? But so why are humans this, well, possessed by killing. Let's put it that way.
Well, um, I'm not the one that came up with this idea, but essentially the answer to your questions is this: an opposable thumb and this, a prefrontal cortex. If you add a highly developed prefrontal cortex to a chimpanzee, and they had a million years to evolve opposable thumbs, they'd be doing the same destruction we are. I think that scientifically that's the answer.
So
Uh,
you are saying life is kind of destined to if it has the tools to, you know, steamroll through everything in its path, or
that seems to be what we're gonna do. I mean, right
okay.
now, and the only possible out from such a outcome would be if people embrace the more pantheistic ideology. That's why I'm a missionary of pantheism. Our natural tendency is to destroy, but perhaps we can see our destruction and learn another way of thinking about the world that we will choose to self-moderate our tendencies towards destruction. I think that that's the only possible path that doesn't lead to our own self-extinction. I think some sort of life form, the great biologist E.O. Wilson says there's bacteria, that live down deep in the earth, many miles deep in the earth. And I think they're going to survive whatever it is we do to this planet. And so for the next 4 billion years until the sun explodes and absorbs the earth into nothingness, uh, those bacteria may survive a whole lot longer. But the beauty of multicellular organisms spread across this gorgeous blue marble of a planet, that could go away uh, sooner than a lot of us might think. I mean, the scientists that study the ways that um, climate change is already triggering just cascades of extinction across the planet. We don't have much more time to embrace a more earth-friendly way of behaving on the planet.
Hmm. What is your kind of view of the future? Because I would just sprinkle it with something I kind of believe, and one of the reasons why I consider myself pantheist. I don't know whether you know Desjardins, this French anthropologist, archaeologist slash philosopher. Pierre Desjardins, I think is Tyler Desjardins is his name, and he was
That's right.
talking about the birth and the end, the alpha and the omega, and
Right,
our okay, at least from his perspective, our destiny or our kind of mission is to merge with well God, universe, whatever you want to call it.
right,
And that's kind of how I see our future to kind of spread the miracle of life wherever we can go because well it's definitely more fun than the rocks kind of rolling over on Mars or whatever they do there. I mean it's not there is not much going on definitely. So and on the other planets as well. So now we know that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of exoplanets. So
right,
universe is waiting to kind of experience the dance and the fun and everything that mankind can bring. So how do you
right.
react to that?
Well, I'm very familiar with Teilhard de Chardin and his philosophy. From my
And sorry to
perspective,
interrupt, I will jump in. I'm not
yeah,
friend, not definitely, but no, I'm not espousing something that Elon Musk is saying. I'm not want to colonize Mars because we should kind of leave Earth to its,
right,
rotting state. I'm just saying that we should kind of see ourselves as well missionaries, or I don't know, that life is definitely more fun than the nothingness. So
true. Uh, I think Elon Musk, I don't, we can psychoanalyze him. I think he's relatively ignorant biologically. I don't think we're ever going to go to Mars. And Elon Musk says, we don't have to worry about destroying the Earth because we're just going to move to Mars. And
Which
that's
is kind of
ridiculous.
stupid now because
It's
Mars is
stupid.
destroyed in the first place. There's nothing there.
That's right. And the idea that we're somehow going to, um, you know, be able to destroy this planet, but turn Mars into a life-sustaining planet. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist,
Hmm.
he has expressly said, it's ridiculous. It's a fairy tale. But he's going to make a lot of money getting people to pursue this fairy tale. Um, but Tay Chardin, he had a very optimistic outlook. Uh,
That's
and
why
I
I
think,
like him.
well, I think that if you were living and thinking in the 1950s, it was easier to think that this was a time of scientific excitement. Technology was going to just turn reality into a wonder world. And, humanity was on this upward trajectory. Those of us that study, religion and philosophy say that uh, Teilhard de Chardin had a teleological point of view, this onward and upward, and that the omega points where humanity was going to merge into God. That was, he was a Catholic theologian after all, even though he was regarded as a heretic. He was a geologist by training, uh, and and he was considered. His writings were suppressed by the Vatican. So he was considered a heretic with some of these dangerous pantheistic ideas. And I do think I would put Teilhard de Chardin in the spiritualized pantheism category. Uh, uh, and I think he might have even, if I could get him drunk in a bar where he was being completely honest, he'd admit it. That's what I think. Uh, but so I'm more pessimistic. I haven't always been pessimistic, but I've not only have I been a pantheist and a thinker about pantheist ideas, I've been an environmental activist. My undergraduate training was in environmental science and studies. I decided I needed to become a lawyer so that I could fight for the environment in court. And so I went to law school. I went to the law school that had the best environmental law program, and I practiced environmental law for 15 years. And what that taught me was we have some environmental laws, they're kind of okay, but the conservative politicians and Republicans here in the United States are doing everything they can to dismantle those environmental laws. And so our environmental laws were weak to begin with. They're trying to get rid of them altogether and trying to get a federal judge here in the United States to actually enforce the weak environmental laws that we have. Uh, you know, is like pulling teeth. Sometimes there'll be a judge that will enforce the laws, but judges are very good at ignoring laws that they don't want to enforce. And I was working for a law firm in Boise, Idaho, here in the United States, and they found out that I was a local environmentalist leader, and they fired me. They fired me because of that.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of the beginning of my foray into investigating religion and the environment. And I sued them for religious discrimination, saying that, you know, a pantheistic reverence for nature is my religion, and my religious practice, like Sabbath observance for a Jewish person, my religious practice was environmental activism. They fired me because of that and therefore violated the Civil Rights Act of
How did it
1964.
go? Did you win?
We eventually settled.
Okay, okay.
They tried to get me thrown out. They successfully got my case dismissed, but we were up on appeal. I had appealed to the Idaho Supreme Court. I think they were worried, and they finally came to me and said, "How much money do we have to throw at you to make you go away?"
Hmm.
And we arrived at a number, and we settled the case.
Okay,
So
so
that's how that
you are leading a cushy life then. Good for you.
it did not lead to cushiness, but it was a satisfying outcome ultimately. You and your listeners, if you go to bernardzalea.substack.com, you can find the whole story of my lawsuit
Hmm.
against my former employers. 30
That was
some
what, in
years.
the 90s or 2000s
Yeah, it was
or
in the mid 90s.
okay. So Clinton
And
era,
so
yeah? Or
there
it was
was
Bush, Bush after Bush years, I imagine, yeah? So Clinton
before
was the
the Bush
president.
years, during the Bill Clinton
No,
years.
the first Bush I meant. It was
Oh,
80
right.
something, 92, I think he kind of ended and Clinton came
That's
or
right. It
whatever.
was the tail end of Bush Senior was
Hmm.
when I was fired.
Hmm.
And a short time after that, Bill Clinton was elected. So my lawsuit was going on during the Clinton administration. And I'm really glad they fired me because it allowed me to start using my law degree in the way I'd always intended it. And so I was suing the United States Forest Service because of their timber sales on public land. I was defending Earth Firsters, which are a radical environmental organization where they would bury themselves in roads, do tree sits high up in the trees that were to be logged, tripod sits. So direct action civil disobedience. I would when I wasn't suing the Forest Service to stop the timber sales, I was defending these radical environmentalists both in criminal court and in civil court for their protest activities. So for about a decade, I was able to use my law degree to wage the righteous war against the exploiters.
Okay.
But then I decided, because of this idea of ideas becoming effective forces in history, and because I had this history of suing my ex-employers based on religious grounds, my pantheism and my environmentalism, I decided I wanted to explore more deeply the connection between religion and environmental ideas, and even more importantly, environmental behaviors. So that's when I hung up my law shingle and went back to graduate school uh, back in 2006 at the University of Florida first, where I wrote my master's thesis on pantheism.
Hmm.
And then I came here to Santa Cruz, California, and the University of California at Santa Cruz to work on my PhD in environmental sociology and environmental studies.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I think of myself as a political sociologist that studies religion and its political consequences. So
Hmm.
that's my actual
Political
expertise.
consequences, that's exactly the right kind of sentence to move on to, because the last couple of minutes of this interview, I wanted to talk about the situation in the States, how you see it from California, what's going on in your home country and home state and everything, because we from Europe, we are just flabbergasted. Like, what the fuck? It's
Right.
like,
Well,
you
that
American psychos, what did you do? Did you voted for Trump the first time? Well, some of them, or some of the voters didn't know what they are buying, but the second time they knew what they are buying and they bought it anyway. And well,
right.
kudos to you. It's like,
Um,
so what is your take on the situation? What's going on? And is there any hope, or are we kind
well,
of all suffering for
there's
Donald's
hope.
megalomania?
There's hope that given the political institutions that we have here in the United States, Trump is the least popular president right now, probably of any president ever. He's more unpopular than Richard Nixon. He's more unpopular than George Bush the dumber during his Iraq War. Yeah, of course, I'm living here in California, which is this dramatically liberal state. So, we call it the left coast.
Hmm.
California, Oregon, and Washington are these blue states that are anti-Trump. But it's not the whole states. All I have to do is drive about 100 miles east out into the California Central Valley, and you see all kinds of pro-Trump signs from the farmers. But I use the example in 2016. Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump in California 2-1. It was about 62% for Hillary Clinton, 34% for Trump. So I do live in an area that is a Democratic stronghold in the country, and it is the largest state in the union. And we have this wonderful governor, Gavin Newsom, and he is constantly making fun of Trump on social media.
No, he's an easy target. I mean, it's
He is
just
a
like
very easy
you
target.
don't have to spend much time to make fun of him. He's just a moron. So, it's
Right. The the so in normal times there'd be no question that the Republicans would lose control of the House of Representatives. But Trump is doing everything he can to rig the elections in his favor. And so that even though he's massively unpopular, he, it's probably outside the course of this conversation, but he's gerrymandering that basically what that means is concentrating liberal voters in one district so that more Republicans will get elected in any given state. And so
yeah, but
unfortunately,
can the rules be skewed that much? Like when you are the least popular president ever, how can he or the Republicans that he represents still win? That's kind of as headwind goes, or how to put it, the climbing up the hill. That's pretty steep climb. So how can it be done? It's crazy for us Europeans to see the way how the system can be bent
right.
for the benefit of whoever has the bending tools. Yeah.
Well, the Donald Trump's main mentor in all of this is Viktor Orban.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, but he
he
was voted
basically,
out.
I know, and so hopefully that's going to happen here as well. But he's a hardcore fascist. He tries to rule by decree in a way that no president has ever done. And he managed to get a conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court that's been letting him get away with this. And the Republicans in Congress, even the ones that don't like Trump, are so afraid of him that they just kowtow to him and do whatever he asks. And unfortunately, the American political system is designed in some ways, designed for someone exactly like Trump to come along. And it just had never happened before.
Because why? Why is it designed the way?
It has to do with the way political power is allocated in the U.S. House of Representatives, which is uh, where representation is based on population of a given state, and then the U.S. Senate, um, you know, uh, every single one of the 50 states have two U.S. senators. And so that means that a person living in Idaho, where I used to live, uh, his vote counts 4 times more than one of us living in California when it comes to senatorial voting.
Hmm.
And so it gives the most conservative populations in the United States unnaturally large numbers of political influence in a way that a parliamentary system, which is pretty much all of Europe, doesn't have. If we wouldn't be in this fix if the United States had lost to Great Britain and had, and would have eventually had a parliamentary system of government. A parliamentary system of government would never allow a Donald Trump.
Okay, question. I don't know about this. So you had this two-tier system from get-go, from 1800 or 1700 something, 1800 something, and you know. But
1787.
okay,
1787
and
is
you
when the
didn't
Constitution.
change it since. So it was 250 years almost of the same system. And
You know, there have been
and big question, can it be changed, or you would have to kind of explode, or to
So
change
there
it?
have been, I'd have to actually look it up, but I think there's been a little bit less than 30 amendments to the US Constitution. The first 10 came just 4 years in of passing the Bill of Rights,
Hmm.
freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Um, and so the Bill of Rights passed right away. It can be changed. The 19th Amendment allowed women to vote. That didn't come along until 1920. Can it be changed? Yes. But here's what's required and why it's so difficult. A constitutional amendment has to pass both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, by a 2/3 vote, 2-to-1 vote. And then it can be sent out to the states for ratification, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. And so that means 38 of the 50 states have to ratify an amendment. And where, roughly
Sorry to jump
half
in.
of,
That means that all the amendments from the past went through this process? Because
that's right.
that it's actually hopeful now, because all the, what you said, almost 30 changes that you implemented went through. So, as probability goes, it isn't that low because it happened 30 times in the past, no?
Well, uh, essentially it did, but every time it happened, it required uh, three 3/4 of the states. And so, the last two states to come into the Union were Hawaii and Alaska. So since 1959, when those last two states were added, now there's 50, meaning that 3/4 of that is 38 states. So one of the amendments that came in since then was letting 18-year-olds vote. Before that, you had to be 21. And the idea was there was enough popularity behind the idea of, if we can draft you at the age of 18 to go fight and die in Vietnam, well, you at least ought to be able to vote. And so that got over the threshold of 38 states saying, that's right, 18-year-olds should be able to vote. Um, and so there's been I'm trying to remember, I think the 25th Amendment, which is getting a lot of conversation right now because Trump seems crazier and crazier. And the 25th Amendment would allow a majority of his cabinet to say, you're unfit, we remove you from office.
Hmm.
And so that was passed, sometime in the 70s, I think. Um, so at any rate, there is this mechanism for changing the Constitution, but the founders that wrote this document meant for it to be a hard thing to do. And it for the most part, has been a hard thing to do.
Mm.
So that's why in a very polarized environment, where you have, these very liberal and very conservative portions, and so much of that conservative population in the American South and up through the Midwest, uh, trying to get the 38 states is, at this point in our history, hard to imagine that happening.
Mm. Another question for someone from California, because people are talking about it, the hypothetical that some states will leave the union because, I mean, as I know the numbers, you actually are paying the conservative states to be better off. So you are kind of sending your tax dollar money to
Right,
help someone who hates you for that. So as
right.
pragmatism goes, maybe you shouldn't be in that such a marriage, where
All
you are
right.
feeding okay, I'm not want to be
Well,
sexy, so let's put it the other way. The wife is
right,
feeding you and you hate her
right.
for it. So So,
Well,
what is the mood for that? Or is there any
well,
mood for that?
certainly there are people in California that understand that we're the fourth largest economy in the world. If we were a country, we'd be the fourth largest economy. And so we generate a lot of the revenue for those red conservative states. They're always railing against people receiving public benefits, and yet they are welfare states supported on the innovation and wealth producing capacity of the blue states.
As denial
Interesting.
goes, this is the definition of denial. Yeah, they will wanna hear about it.
That's right. There was an interesting study just about 6, 7 years ago. There's 435 congressional districts in the United States across the nation, and so you'll sometimes see a map of those red congressional districts and blue congressional districts. If you look at the economic activity produced inside those blue congressional districts, 67% of the United States' GNP, GDP, GNP, are produced from those blue states. So even in the red states, the economic wealth creation is happening in the blue parts of those states. And so, the fact that, ignorance and denial is what keeps people fervent Donald Trump supporters.
Okay, 30 something percentage points. That means like almost 70% of Americans understand reality, at least in broad strokes, because they don't like him anymore. I mean, they made mistakes.
Right,
But anyway,
that
so
is.
what is your kind of hope or how you see the future? So what will happen? Because to be okay, extra curious about it, as I said, I'm living in Vienna and we are organizing a trip to New York, the SPO, the political party here in Austria and Vienna, and we want to
Mhm.
see the midterms. And when I'm discussing it with my wife, then she's torn because maybe there won't be any midterms, or maybe the midterms will be met with some, well, funky violence. You Americans kind of like shooting. So she's kind of worried that, maybe you
Right,
shouldn't go there. And well, here we are. I have an American fella here, so I'm asking the questions. In half a year,
right.
the midterms are on the horizon. So how probable is it that there will be midterms?
I, there's going to be midterms.
You are
Trump is.
100% sure? Because people are
I
talking
am
like they are not,
80%
it's
sure. I'm
hazy, huh?
80% sure. I'm
80,
80%
80.
sure.
Okay.
I think Trump is going to try to cancel him. He's going to try to declare a state of emergency and say, just like Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine can't have elections, we can't have elections. Some
Yeah,
people
but he was
think
definitely attacked. He's under,
that's
he
right.
was attacked by the neighbor. What excuse can he pull from his magical hat and
Well,
tell
and some
what
people
what?
think he started the war with Iran to give him an excuse
Yeah, but
to
that's on the
cancel
other
the
side of the
elections.
planet. So who cares what's going on there? I mean, most people can't even find Iran on the map. So why should they care that,
Well, but they can find that the gas is more expensive at the pump.
no, they sure can, but that's the reason why they won't be voting for Republicans because it's
Right.
of their making. So, I mean, I'm curious how it can be done because I understand the situation in Ukraine and all in general. When you are in the state of war, you are not organizing elections because, well, it's just you need all the stability there is. How can he do such a thing in America that wasn't attacked? And the war that the Americans are waging is, most people even don't know where Iran is. So.
Let me see if I understand. Your colleagues are thinking about going to New York to
No, not only
watch.
them, myself as well. So
Right.
bunch of us because we are visiting places when something interesting is going on, and well,
Right.
the thing is organized for New York and Washington, and what do I know? But
So if you were to go to, New York is a blue state.
Yeah, but the
And
question
I
is
do,
whether the elections will be held in the first place, and can Trump really kind of stop the election altogether, even in the blue states, the red states, wherever? He can just cancel it. Is
he's
it
going
is
to
it
try.
doable? And is there a precedence? Did it ever happen in American history?
Even during the Civil War, the election was held.
Okay, that
Abraham
explains
Lincoln
it.
got Abraham Lincoln got reelected to his second term. He was inaugurated and gave his second inaugural event, even as the Civil War was still being waged.
Okay.
So that no, there is no precedent in the United States for ever canceling an election. That doesn't mean he's not going to try to do it. And fortunately, the, uh, the Constitution favors states control how an election is done inside their own borders. And he's going to try to say, well, I have the power to override that. And we simply don't know the answer if his current conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court will let him get away with that. We don't know the answer to that.
Hmm.
And so, however, I do think that there are going to be lots of liberal voters that will be poll watching. And so if he tries to send out his gun-toting thugs and supporters to try to interfere with the elections, a lot of liberals are going to show up and put their bodies in the way of that kind of intimidation. Well, it's going to be an interesting time. I live in a relatively safe liberal place. I probably won't have to go out and face down ICE stormtroopers trying to interfere at a polling place. That's probably not going to happen here. But it could be happening over in Arizona. It could be happening in some of the conservative parts of California. It could definitely be happening up in over in Nevada, which is a swing state. It won't be happening up in Idaho because it's all Republicans anyway, and they always vote Republican. Uh, so, but we've never had anything quite like this current threat to American democracy, and so we'll see, how it turns out.
Have you
So
seen?
I
You
can't
see it
say.
as a test of your kind of commitment to democracy, or you see it as a failure of your nation to kind of adhere to democracy? What is it that you kind of have in your
Well,
mind when you're thinking what's going on right now? Because, as I said, we Europeans, we are just like, what the fuck?
right, and that's a lot of us in California think that too. You know, I don't do it quite so much because I'm a political sociologist. I understand what's happening and why it's happening. So I'm less confused by it. I can look at American history and see that in some ways this is the perfect storm that we've been marching towards ever since Reagan and Thatcher, started to impose neoliberalism on the world. And so this is kind of a natural endpoint, a teleos as Teilhard de Chardin
Hmm.
might say.
Yeah, but
You
how
know,
come that it's America? You were the stronghold of democracy. Okay, not perfect, but still, we Europeans fell into that hole of fascism. And I mean, why is your
and
immune system so weak nowadays?
it has to do with the flaws that were built into the system from the very beginning, and they were designed to preserve slavery and the power of the slave states. And so this dysfunction has been embedded in the American system of government ever since the beginning. And so that's why we don't have as robust a democracy as I think pretty much most of Europe. And I think that Europe has a more robust democracy because you have a parliamentary system of government instead of the kind of representative federation of states like we have in the United States.
Mm.
You have this federal government but you also have the state sovereignty issue. And up until now, sometimes that's been a bad thing. It led to the Civil War back in the 1860s. Sometimes it's been, the federal government being stronger has been a good thing. To pass the Civil Rights Act and force the American South to stop their racist behavior. But you may have heard that the U.S. Supreme Court just eviscerated the U.S. Voting Rights Act. And so conservative states are moving very quickly to strip voting rights from black and brown voters. So
Voting
they're
rights in what sense? So they lost the possibility to vote or right to
potentially,
vote?
basically, the Civil Rights Act, the American South after the Civil War was, came up with all kinds of ingenious ways to keep black people from voting, even though the U.S. Constitution said they could. They came up with other ways to say, well, we're not discriminating against you because you're black. We're discriminating against you because you're ignorant. And so there were like tests that you
Hmm.
had to take that no black person could ever pass. And so that's what the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 took away the ability imposed from the federal government on the southern states to be able to engage in those kinds of activities. And now the US Supreme Court has said those acts that preserved non-white voting, we've decided those were unconstitutional, and that states have a right to gerrymander to
When
rig
did
this.
that happen? This year or last year? This
It
decision that you
happened
are.
like in the last couple of weeks.
Oh, okay, okay. So it's pretty recent. Okay, okay.
It's very recent. And there was a major weakening of the Voting Rights Act about 10 years ago. And that has led to a lot of what's happening in the United States was this two big decisions. Um, was in 2013, the Citizens United case said that billionaires and rich people could spend as much money in
Hmm.
political campaigns as they wanted because political spending was free speech. And so that's something that has happened just in the last 14 years. Was it unleashed this flood of corporate and billionaire money into the American political system to the detriment of the American political system. And then the Voting Rights Act, I forget exactly what year, I'm going to say about 2015 or 16, weakened the Voting Rights Act, took the first stab at it, and weakened it and allowed the South and Texas, especially, but all of the American South, to start rigging their systems in ways that made it easy for whites to vote and hard for Latinos and blacks to vote. Um, and then this, just in the last couple of weeks, another decision that further weakened whatever remaining power the Voting Rights Act had. And so, in answering your question of why are we in this fix that we are in the United States, uh, you know, billionaire money and racist voting schemes in the conservative states of the United States is what's put us, uh, is what allows a Donald Trump to come to power and potentially stay in power.
Well, ending with this happy thought, because I wanted to hold it for 1.5 hours, this interview, so it's roughly spot on.
Okay,
So, well, Bernie, thank you very much for all the insights, for the discussion about pantheism, for the discussion about the state of the affairs in American, well, political nightmare nowadays.
right.
And break a leg, and we will see where the path leads, no?
Well, and thank you for inviting me to do this. There's nothing I like to talk about more than pantheism and politics.
Oh, well,
Uh,
then you had a good
yeah.
time then.
Religion and politics, they're the
Yeah.
only things worth talking about, in my
Okay.
opinion.
Great, Alec. Thank you, Bernie.
All righty. Thank you.